Hey everybody, how you doing? This is Dan Blanchard with the Traveling Time with Dan Show, where we mix travel with history, with leadership, and of course me, Dan Blanchard. Today I'm in Philadelphia at the Assembly Room of Independence Hall. This room, the bottom window is right there, just to your left of the George Washington statue. That's the room where George Washington sat in this mahogany chair with a sun peeking over the horizon, that's where he presided over the Constitution Convention for months, sitting in that chair. And I gotta tell you, during this time in 1787, there was a lot of uncertainty about our country. The Articles of Confederation were not working, and there was other countries and other democracies that have gone down the path and have failed, and it looked like we might be one of them. And England, I imagine, was going, see, told you, not so easy to run a government, is it, right? Well, in this room right there, so many amazing, impactful things happened in this country. Again, to the left side of the George Washington statue, the bottom four windows right there in 1776 is where the Declaration of Independence was argued over, written over, and developed, right? 11 years later in 1787, is where the Constitutional Convention would be, and where we would again argue over and create the Constitution of our country. All right, and how do we know these things that took place in that? Well, of course, there were notes on the debates by James Madison and the Federal Convention of 1787. James Madison took very good notes, and one of the notes he said was that Benjamin Franklin, who had been staring for months at the chair that George Washington was sitting in, who George Washington didn't really say much, just kind of listened to a lot that was going on, right? Yeah, and he was like the common presence in the room. But Benjamin Franklin had been staring at George Washington's chair in that right there in that room, the Assembly Room, said that when George Washington stood up at the end, he said, "This is now, I've been looking at this chair and wondering if this sun was setting or rising, and I can now see that the sun is rising." So he transformed George Washington's chair from a piece of furniture into a symbol of our country, of hope during a very uncertain time in our country. And symbols are very powerful. And some of the symbols that were on that chair was the Liberty cap sitting on top of the Liberty pole, which meant that the United States is going to be free of tyranny. Other symbols was there was a Cornucopias, which is the horns of plenty, and the sheaves of grain, which meant that the vast land of the United States was going to be able to supply its people with food and a plenty, right? A plenty. Okay, so here, the Constitution, right? This is something that had never been done before. That I think is the only country in the world that was built on an idea. We're building something that had never existed before right there in that assembly room, all right? Now, it's not perfect. It's not perfect at all, okay? Let's look, it actually protected the institution of slavery so that it could be passed as a starting point. And why the institution of slavery was being protected in that room, George Washington's chair, which we talk so much about, was actually a luxury chair of mahogany. And it came from the West Indies, where it was produced by slaves in the West Indies, right? But even though it wasn't perfect, it was a starting point for this country. There'd be lots of amendments coming. Ben Franklin said, it's not perfect, but it's a start, and lots of amendments coming to help. Right, lots of amendments coming to help make it a more perfect document, a more perfect union, right? There's going to be lots of social movements that are going to develop over the next couple hundred years, which are going to affect the amendments and how the Supreme Court and the justice system interprets the Constitution, interprets the law, right? So now the question becomes, Ben Franklin said we are a rising nation, not a setting nation, right? The sun's not setting here, it's rising. Here it is a couple hundred years later as we get close to the, we are at the 250th birthday of America, and we have to say, are we still rising? Some people say, of course. Other people say, I don't know. Not sure if we're still rising. It's definitely a question we need to ask ourselves. So what is that chair? Let's go back to that chair, George Washington's chair. What does it represent? It represents hope. right? Also a little uncertainty. Yes, these are very uncertain times, right? But if you're not doing something during certain times, something that doesn't bring you some uncertainty and butterflies in your belly, well, then I guess you're not doing something big enough, right? But this right here is the creation of the United States right there in that assembly room, those bottom windows of that floor right there. So, when I do an episode of Travel on Time with Dan, I like to talk about travel, history, and leadership, and of course me. Again, if you have not seen the assembly room in Independence Hall, if you've not seen George Washington's chair, definitely come down and get it. If you come down and see anything in Philadelphia, you won't be sorry. It won't be a waste of time. Philadelphia is a fabulous city, right? A fabulous city. So definitely come down and check it out. Now, what's the leadership lesson? Well, the leadership lesson would be leaders use stories and symbols to inspire others during difficult moments like the symbols of George Washington's chair, right? Leadership often requires a negotiation and working with people you disagree with. That is what happened in that room behind me through that first floor windows of the assembly room where George Washington sat in a mahogany chair for 3 months presiding over people who did not fully agree with each other on how this government was going to become. When they got out of it, they were like, what do you think of the government, the new government? Many of them were like, it's the government, but we're going to make it better. We're going to make it better. And through the hundreds of years, they have made it better. Of course, there's been a lot of times that have not been perfect. Today's not perfect, but we need to keep working toward that more perfect union. All right, everybody, thank you for spending time with me today on the Travel on Time with Dan show, where we get to talk to you about the assembly chair and George Washington's chair there, the assembly room of Independence on the George Washington's chair there. This is great. We mix travel with history, with leadership, and of course, for me, Dan Blanchard. I'm going to be back real soon, talk to you and show you and share with you some other great things. Till then, you take care.